Hey guys, welcome back to another tutorial for Bitwig Studio. Today it's about creating deterministic melodies with the sine mod in the Polarity grid. And this technique, or kind of technique, was invented by the Pope actually on the Bitwig Discord. So I want to give him full credit for this. And I saw him posting this, I don't know, a month ago, and I was trying it out in the recent streams. Some of you actually saw me using this technique. And yeah, I was trying it out, and it's actually super helpful. It works pretty well, and I want to show you in this video how it works step by step. So let's start. At first, we need a phase input, and the phase input gives us a steady signal from the transport. I use an oscilloscope here so you can see the signal. So it's just a ramp, right? I showed you this in some of my earlier tutorials, and we just try to transform the signal so we can use it for our purpose. So what we need is a sine mod, and the sine mod transforms the phase signal, as you can see here. Instead of this ramp, we now get this pretty complicated signal here. And we can modify the signal to our liking, right? And the best part about this signal is that it's repeating. You get a repeated or repeatable pattern. It's also deterministic, because every time you set up here the right numbers, or the same numbers. For instance, here 1.14, and here we have 135%. And you input the same signal, you get also, always the same outcome. So you know exactly what you get when you dial in the numbers. And this is called more or less deterministic. What we need now is, of course, something that produces sound. So we need an oscillator, and we need an amp envelope, and we need an output. And when you use these combination of modules, you have of course here a pre-chord activated for the pitch. So we can use the MIDI keyboard, but you don't want to use that now, so I disable this. And we also don't want to use the gate input pre-chord here. So we want to trigger this by ourselves with the signal coming out of the sine mod, right? So what we can do basically is just hook this up here to the pitch input, and maybe also just trigger this here. Which creates some kind of weird noises. And that's maybe okay, that's maybe exactly what you want, but in our case we want to create more kind of a melody. So we need to transform the signal more. Maybe just delete this line here. And we need to bring this into a pitch range. And this you can do by a scalar, pitch scalar. And you can change in which range you want to create notes or pitch signals. In this case here, it's between C3 and C4. Maybe go down to C2 here. And now we just trigger this again. So it's more like in an audible range, right? And we can, of course, narrow this more down to a scale with the pitch quantizer. And choose some kind of notes here we want to have in our pitch signal. So this is D sharp minor. The problem now is that we have some kind of glides between the notes, because the pitch signal here is not, you have some transitions here from different notes. So we need to use a sample and hold before here we go into the pitch input check. And we need to trigger this here with our trigger signal. And now we get some kind of stepped input. You can see here, this is how basically the pitch signal looks like now. This was the pitch signal before. see all kinds of glides and transitionings here. And this red one here is basically after this. So we can change the signal a bit. So the problem now is basically that because we use the sine mod output here also as a trigger signal, we only trigger the AD when we have high notes or high-pitched notes. It's the same signal, right? So and you can see when we look here at the signal, so every time we are basically at the top here and generate high-pitched notes, we also trigger the AD. So we only let basically high notes through the AD. So we need to change the signal for the triggers a bit differently, or treat it a bit differently, or maybe even use a different input as a signal. So maybe we use here the gates module as an input for the AD, and we use this for the pitch, something like this. So this is a possibility. You can also maybe change the signal even more. So maybe we have, this is our first sine mod signal, and when you use a second sine mod here, go with the sine mod output here in this one, and generate a second signal, right? That's even more complex than the first one. And then we use this as a trigger. And delete here the gates module. So the benefit of this is when you change the first sine mod, you also change basically the second one. So you change the pitch and the gate signals at the same time. Maybe change here this setting a bit. So now the problem is the trigger signal is completely off the grid. It's not synchronized with our 110 BPM beat grid, right? So what we can do now is we can use a clock quantizer. Clock quantize here. And we basically quantize our signal. So we go into this here. And then we use this output as a trigger for the sample and hold and the AD. And all we need to do now is we need a static beat quantized or transport synchronized signal. We can use trigger module, this one here, which basically outputs a static pulse synchronized to the transport. And we use your 16 notes beat grid, go into here. And now we can use this as a trigger signal, and it's completely synchronized now to our 110 BPM. Or maybe use a second oscilloscope here so we can see. So basically the first signal here is our signal generated by the first sine mod. And we're using this for the notes. And the second signal here is basically the first sine mod signal changed with the second, the first sine mod signal changed with the second sine mod signal. And it's much more complex, and we use this to trigger the AD here. And we also synchronize this to a 16th notes grid. Yeah. based on our transport BPM setting. So this is here basically the outcome of this. You can see this is our trigger signal. So we have created the trigger signal and a pitch signal from the phase input signal just by changing and modifying signals and using these signals basically to change pitch and gate for our synthesizer. And like I said in the beginning, this is completely deterministic. So when we remember here the settings, this is 115%, 1.12. And every time we come back to these settings, we have the same melody line. So same numbers, same outcome, it's deterministic. Yeah, this is basically the simple setup you can think of a nice generative, or it's not a generative patch because it's not evolving, right? If you want to have some evolving things into this, you probably want to modulate here the settings of the first sine mod and maybe the second sine mod. And because everything is synced here to a beat grid and also pitch quantized, you never get out of the scale and you never lose basically rhythm, or you basically not off grid basically with the rhythm. That's what I want to say. So you can change this basically pretty easily here with some random modulators if you want. So now you basically have two random modulators modulating the sine mod setting 1 and setting 2 here. It's the amount and the rate basically. So you kind of create multiple different combination of these two values. So you have a kind of an evolving thing going on. Also, we change the second sine mod, which controls the trigger signal. So you have different combination of melodies and rhythms that change over time. So it's kind of generative. At some point, you probably run into repeating patterns, but you know, it's still interesting to use. Also interesting is we have the signal here by the first sine signal. And this is, yeah, you can see it's pretty drastic in the changes sometimes. Pretty steep value changes here over time. So what we can do is we can try to even this out with an average module. And see transitionings become more like rounded and smoothed out on the edges. What we lose is basically the signal range here. As you can see, some of the signals doesn't go up to the 1 line here or back to the 0 line. And if you increase the average thing here, it becomes flatter and flatter. But you can use this also here as an input for our pitch scaler and change the melody over time a bit. So you have another value that you can modulate and change over time to create more interesting or different patterns. So what you can do now is if you raise the average, you basically stay on one note longer until you at the highest point, you basically just generate just only one note. And if you pull this back to 0, you generate a big range of dynamic values. So you can decrease or increase the dynamic of your signal for the notes. So yeah, that's it for this video, basically. I want to give you some kind of rough inspiration for using the sine mod as an pitch input or as a gate input signal. And you can do a lot more with these signals. You can, of course, add all the phase modifiers after the sine mod or before the sine mod to shape the signal even more. Or you can use delays to offset these signals if you use for the trigger signals and the pitch signals the same phase signal as an origin. You can offset these both signals to delay the trigger signal from the pitch signal, and so on. There's a lot of stuff you can do. You can, of course, use feedback loops if you want, or sample some of the stuff with the recorder and play it back in different settings or different timings. You know, there's a lot of things you can do. So I wanted to keep it a bit simple for this tutorial to show you the general setup of this. And yeah, want to inspire you to try it out for yourself. So thanks for watching. Please leave a thumbs up if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel, and maybe think about a subscription over on Patreon or here on YouTube. It helps me a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.